Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. In the magical community, certain families have particularly dark reputations, and the Malfoy family undoubtedly ranks among them. The Malfoys are one of the oldest, wealthiest, and most influential magical families in Great Britain. For centuries, they have treated Muggles and half-bloods with disdain. However, the history of the Malfoys contains many hidden and little-known facts. Today, we'll dive into the most intriguing details of this family's life. Enjoy immersing yourself in the story. Number 1. Opposition to the Statute of Secrecy. Before the enactment of the famous Statute of Secrecy, the Malfoys actively interacted with influential Muggles, especially the wealthy and noble. They strongly opposed the law which would deprive them of beneficial connections. However, once the Statute of Secrecy was passed, the Malfoys instantly changed their position, severing all ties with Muggles and vigorously supporting the Ministry of Magic's policies, denying any previous association with the Muggle world. Number 2. The first Lucius Malfoy and Queen Elizabeth I. One of the most scandalous stories carefully hidden by the Malfoys involves the first Lucius Malfoy, who attempted to marry Queen Elizabeth I and one of the most powerful Muggles of her time. The Queen refused Malfoy and never married afterward. There is a theory among magical historians suggesting that a furious Lucius cast a powerful curse upon Elizabeth, causing her lifelong spinsterhood. Number 3. Relations with half-bloods. Despite their pride in pure-blood status, the Malfoys willingly marry half-blood wizards. The reason is simple: the magical world is small, and suitable pure-blood partners are scarce, while marriage between close relatives is discouraged by the family. Thus the Malfoys compromise by forming alliances with wizards of mixed heritage. Number 4. Family ties. Close familial connections are common in the wizarding world. Narcissa, Draco Malfoy's mother, comes from the renowned Black family. Her mother was from the Rosier family. Narcissa's sister, Bellatrix, married Rodolphus Lestrange, a particularly valuable union for the family. However, her other sister, Andromeda, married Muggle-born Edward Tonks, and their daughter, Nymphadora, married Remus Lupin. Thus, the famous Battle of Hogwarts largely represented a struggle between distant and close relatives. Number 5. Family coat of arms. The Malfoys' black, green, and silver crest features serpents, symbolizing the family's connection to Salazar Slytherin, the founder of Slytherin House. The inscription on the crest reads, Sanctimonia vincit semper, meaning purity will always conquer, emphasizing the family's pride in their bloodline. Number 6. Origin of the name. The surname Malfoy comes from the old French words mal, bad, evil, and foy, faith, trust. Thus, it reflects the family's beliefs, symbolizing bad faith or allegiance to dark ideals. Number 7. Armand Malfoy and the family estate. The history of the Malfoy family estate begins with Armand Malfoy, who rendered some mysterious services to King William III. In gratitude, the king gifted him extensive lands seized from previous owners, where the manor was established and where the family has lived for centuries. Number 8. Unctuous Osbert and Septimus Malfoy's influence. Unctuous Osbert was the 10th Minister for Magic of Great Britain, 1789-1798, but his close friendship with Septimus Malfoy led to rumours that Malfoy was behind most ministry decisions. If true, Septimus might have been the most powerful member of the family, operating from the shadows. Number 9. Abraxas Malfoy and the Muggle-born Minister of Magic. Abraxas Malfoy, Draco's grandfather, was allegedly involved in a conspiracy to overthrow the first Muggle-born minister, Nobby Leach. The minister fell mysteriously ill in 1968 and resigned, with many believing Abraxas played a role. Number 10. Family's forgiveness after the war. Although Lucius, Narcissa, and Draco supported Voldemort, they avoided severe punishment after the war. Lucius assisted the ministry in tracking down Death Eaters. Draco betrayed Voldemort at a crucial moment, and Narcissa lied to the Dark Lord about Harry's death. However, even afterward, Lucius never stopped his fascination with dark artifacts, including the powerful time-turner mentioned in The Cursed Child. Number 11. The Secret Malfoy Library. Beneath Malfoy Manor, deeper than the coldest stones, there is a door that doesn't exist. No hinges, no key, no sound. Only blood opens it, and only two are allowed to pass. Head of the family and heir. They call it the Black Vault. A library of dark magic so dangerous the Ministry tried to find it more than once. They failed every time. Spells led nowhere. Maps shifted. One aura vanished. The others returned, broken, shaking, silent. Lucius was 17 when he saw it. His father lit a single torch. The walls breathed. The steps moved. "Speak nothing of what you see," Abraxas whispered, "or it will speak to you instead." Lucius obeyed. Inside, books crawl. Some whisper. Some bleed. Some bite. One floats wrapped in chains, humming low like a storm. Another, bound in serpent skin, watches with blinking eyes. It doesn't like being seen. The oldest book, said to be written by Salazar Slytherin himself. No title. Just a carved warning. Do not open unless you are ready to lose what makes you human. Lucius never touched it, not even once. Number 12. Malfoys and Alchemy. Brutus Malfoy wasn't like the rest of his family. While others chased curses and power, he vanished into cold, silent rooms filled with gold dust and dragon blood. He spoke little, slept less. Even the house elves feared his footsteps. In 1765, Brutus met Nicolas Flamel. It wasn't chance, it was invitation only, an alchemist's gathering in Marseille. Flamel was cautious, but Brutus spoke in formulas, not flattery. "You see further than most," Flamel once wrote, "but you walk too close to the fire." Still, they worked together for 10 years, in secret. Some say Brutus came close. Too close. One vial, sealed in crystal, was found after his death. The liquid inside pulsed red in summer, blue in winter. No known spell could replicate it. Goblins called it Echo Stone. Others whispered, the failed stone. Lucius never spoke of Brutus, but he sealed his lab with blood wards. When the Death Eaters took over Malfoy Manor, they weren't allowed near that wing. One tried. He came back screaming. His skin crawled with glowing runes. "Brutus still guards his work," Lucius said, and no one laughed. In the library there's a shelf of untitled books. The pages resist copying. One hums when touched, another smells like burnt metal. Draco once asked what they were. Lucius answered, "Warnings, nothing more." But his eyes lingered on the shelf too long. Number 13. Portrait collection with a voice. In a dim hallway of Malfoy Manor, beyond a set of locked iron doors, hangs a gallery unlike any other in the wizarding world. The portraits don't just move, they scheme, they whisper, they remember. Each frame holds a former Malfoy, captured in paint and enchantments, immortalized to protect the family legacy. Abraxas Malfoy sits in the largest frame, his silver cane resting by his velvet chair. He often speaks first when summoned. "You must not act in haste," he once told Lucius during the height of the Ministry investigation. "Panic breeds mistakes. Wait, watch." Lucius followed the advice, and the auras left empty-handed. Next to him, Septimus Malfoy, a master of magical law, keeps records of wizarding loopholes. Clause 14b, he once shouted across the frames, was repealed in 1892. Use that to block their warrant. His portrait smirked as Lucius scribbled notes. Septimus never lost a case, even after death. Lucrecia Malfoy, despite her Ravenclaw past, holds a place among them. Her portrait is newer, placed only after Draco insisted. "She belongs here," he said. And though Abraxas rolled his eyes in oil and canvas, he didn't object. Lucrecia rarely speaks, but when she does, the room falls silent. Each night, Lucius would walk the gallery alone. He'd stand before the frames, ask questions no outsider could hear. Should I trust Snape? Will the Dark Lord rise again? What of Dumbledore? The portraits never gave easy answers. Only riddles, warnings, and memory-laced advice. During the war, when the manor was used by Voldemort, the frames were silenced. A spell cast by Abraxas himself long ago. If the house falls under shadow, our mouths shall close until the light returns. Draco found the words carved beneath the largest frame. The silence unnerved him more than the Death Eaters. Number 14, not all Malfoys were in Slytherin. The sorting hat paused longer than usual. It hovered above Lucrecia Malfoy's head, whispering, tugging, considering. "Slytherin would welcome you," it murmured. "But your thirst for knowledge, it's Ravenclaw that suits you best." And just like that, the unthinkable happened. A Malfoy was sorted away from Slytherin into blue and bronze. Gasps filled the great hall. At the Slytherin table, two Malfoy cousins froze mid-clap. Lucrecia rose with steady hands, but her face was pale. She walked toward the Ravenclaw table as though to an exile. For the rest of her schooling, the family barely acknowledged her existence. Back at the manor, Armand Malfoy, her uncle and head of the family, was furious. In a letter now preserved in the private Malfoy archives, he wrote, "She may wear Ravenclaw's crest, but she carries Slytherin's shame. This matter is not to be discussed outside these walls." Lucrecia's portrait was never hung. But Hogwarts remembered, and Lucrecia did not shrink. She thrived. By third year, she was tutoring upperclassmen in arithmancy. By fifth year, she was winning national awards for spell construction. In her seventh year, she rewrote half of the charms curriculum with Professor Flitwick. The Ravenclaws adored her. The Slytherins ignored her. And Lucrecia? She kept her head high. Once, when a younger Malfoy sneered at her in the corridor, she smiled and said, "Brains and pride are not enemies, dear cousin. Only cowards think so." After graduation, she vanished into the world of magical research. For decades, her name appeared in publications. She developed a counter-curse for the Wither-Wilt hex. She led an expedition into the Forbidden Steppes to study ancient magical fossils. Her work changed textbooks, but the Malfoys never claimed her. He never told anyone, but he read every word. And maybe that's why, years later, when his own son stood beneath the sorting hat, Draco didn't flinch when it called out, "Ravenclaw!" Number 15, banned from Quidditch governance. Quidditch was more than a sport to the Malfoys. It was a stage, a tool, a way to show power without casting a single spell. But the wizarding world has a long memory, and not all games are forgotten, especially not the one played in 1762 during the World Championship in Luxembourg. That year, Octavius Malfoy, wealthy, charming, and dangerous, was caught bribing 3 international referees. The goal was simple: ensure the victory of the Transylvanian team, which his family had secretly sponsored. It worked. For one dazzling afternoon, the stadium roared in false glory. But the truth, as always, surfaced. A Bulgarian official found a sealed pouch in the referee's tent. Inside were galleons bearing the Malfoy crest. A hasty investigation followed. Witnesses spoke. Records emerged. Octavius denied everything, of course, but one judge broke under veritaserum. His confession shocked the Confederation. The verdict was swift. The Malfoy name was blacklisted. Henceforth, stated the decree, no member of the Malfoy family shall hold office, advisory or administrative, within the International Quidditch Confederation. It was the first lifetime ban issued by the council. Octavius left the stadium that day with his head high, but his legacy scorched. Lucius Malfoy never forgot. As a child, he heard the story whispered behind closed doors. As an adult, he searched for ways to undo the damage. He couldn't. So he found another way in: funding, sponsorship, backroom talks, whispered suggestions. His name never appeared on official rosters, but his money always moved the brooms. In 1994, when the Quidditch World Cup came to Britain, Lucius pulled strings to secure top-tier seats for his family. He had no title, no role, but everyone knew he stood beside Cornelius Fudge like an invisible advisor. "Influence doesn't need a chair," Lucius once said. "It only needs a door." Number 16. Hidden influence over Hogwarts. Behind the ancient stone walls of Hogwarts, few suspected how deep the Malfoy name ran. Long before Albus Dumbledore took the headmaster's seat, the family had already carved a silent throne of influence. They didn't need titles, they had galleons, and for many years those galleons shaped more than just castle repairs. Lucius Malfoy was not the first. His father, Abraxas, played the game with elegance, a donation here, a subtle request there. Professors were quietly replaced, subjects were subtly shifted. One year, a defense against the dark arts teacher mysteriously stepped down after refusing to adopt a more traditional approach. Weeks later, the Malfoys funded the construction of a new broom shed. Coincidence? No one believed it. When Lucius inherited his father's seat on the Hogwarts Board of Governors, he didn't waste time. He demanded that bloodline history be a mandatory course. He suggested that Muggle studies be replaced with wizarding ethics. In a letter to then-headmaster Armando Dippet, he wrote, "It is not only our duty to preserve magical knowledge, but to ensure the right hands receive it." Dumbledore's rise changed everything. From the very beginning, Albus refused the gold. He refused the strings attached to it. That infuriated Lucius. What had once been polite influence turned into veiled threats. Dumbledore stood firm. "You see, Lucius," he once said during a board meeting, "Hogwarts is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." The tension only grew. Lucius lobbied to have Dumbledore removed during the Chamber of Secrets incident. He used the attacks as a weapon. He rallied the governors, twisted the fear. And for a moment, he succeeded. Albus was forced to leave, but only for a while. "You will find," Dumbledore said upon his return, "that I have more friends in this castle than you expected." Number 17. Malfoys and dragons. The Malfoys always believed dragons were more than beasts. For them, dragons were a symbol of control, fear, and noble blood. Not everyone in the wizarding world dared to agree, but the Malfoys didn't care. They had their own truth. And in the heart of Wiltshire, their manor once held a secret so dangerous it nearly caused a scandal that would shake the ministry. It began with Tiberius Malfoy, an ancestor of Lucius. Proud, cunning, and feared even among pure-blood families. He didn't just admire dragons, he owned one. A Hungarian horntail, the deadliest of all. The dragon, named Vortem, was hidden deep in the manor's forest, behind layers of enchantments and wards. Only a few ever saw it and lived to tell the tale. Vortem wasn't a prisoner. He was a weapon. Tiberius used him to intimidate rivals, silence debtors, and negotiate alliances. In a letter to Abraxas Malfoy, now kept in the restricted section of the Malfoy library, Tiberius once wrote, "Fear is the purest currency, and dragons are its mint." The quote would later be repeated in whispers throughout Slytherin House. But dragons are not easily hidden. One summer night, a group of Muggle hikers wandered too close. They never returned. The incident triggered a secret investigation. The Ministry of Magic, already suspicious of the Malfoys' power, sent 2 auras to the estate. One returned, badly burned, the other disappeared entirely. Minister Ottiline Gamble herself had to intervene. With the help of a dozen Obliviators and 4 dragon wranglers from Romania, the ministry subdued Vortem. The dragon was relocated to an undisclosed preserve. The event never made the profit, but the wizarding world felt the ripples. A law was passed just weeks later. Private ownership of dragons was now illegal. Lucius Malfoy never spoke of it publicly. But in a rare moment of honesty, he told Arthur Weasley during a heated exchange at the ministry, "Power must be tamed, Arthur. We learned that with fire." Arthur never forgot those words. Neither did the auras who cleaned up Tiberius's legacy. Number 18. Failed alliance with Grindelwald. In the dim corridors of wizarding history, there are tales that never found their way into textbooks at Hogwarts. One such tale whispers through the pages of forgotten letters and the murmur of suspicious silences, the story of Cassius Malfoy and his failed attempt to forge a dark alliance with Gellert Grindelwald. It is a tale of ambition, shadows, and a decision that altered not just a family's fate, but perhaps the course of wizarding history itself. Cassius Malfoy was not a name that rang through the halls of power as loudly as his descendants, but in the 1920s he was a figure of influence and ruthless determination. An uncle to Abraxas Malfoy and a patriarch of the Malfoy bloodline during that turbulent era, Cassius held tightly to the family's belief in pure blood supremacy. At a time when the wizarding world was simmering with unrest and the ideals of blood purity were being challenged across Europe, Cassius sought not merely to survive, but to ascend. It was in 1926 that the first documented connection was made. A letter from Cassius to a fellow pure-blood noble, Thaddeus Nott, revealed the ambition stirring within. Grindelwald, Cassius wrote, is not merely a radical, but a visionary. His ideology, though ruthless, offers us a future where wizards are not shackled by Muggle ignorance. It was a telling statement, not of allegiance yet, but of curiosity, of dangerous interest. By then, Gellert Grindelwald's reputation was already blossoming into infamy. The Dark Wizard had fled from Durmstrang, gathered loyalists under the banner of For the Greater Good, and begun orchestrating a movement that promised to topple the balance between magical and non-magical society. Wizards like Cassius Malfoy saw in Grindelwald's cause the potential restoration of the old order, a world where the Malfoy name would command not just respect, but fear. Historical fragments suggest that Cassius made his first personal approach to Grindelwald in early 1927 in a clandestine meeting in the Austrian Alps. The meeting location itself, an ancient mountain chalet once belonging to a forgotten Transylvanian seer, spoke to the secrecy of their dealings. According to a later memoir by an unnamed source, Grindelwald arrived flanked by 2 silent followers in dark cloaks, his eyes glittering with something between charm and menace. Cassius came not with civility, but with a proposition. The Malfoys, with their deep pockets and deeper network within the British Ministry of Magic, could offer logistical support, concealment, and information. Cassius believed that by tying his family to Grindelwald's rise, he could ensure a future where his bloodline would sit at the throne of magical power in Britain. But Grindelwald, as history would reveal, was not a man easily impressed. A recovered journal entry from a former Grindelwald lieutenant, believed to be Vinda Rosier, gives us a chilling glimpse into the meeting. "The Englishman," she wrote, "carries himself with arrogance. He speaks of alliances like he speaks of dinner guests. The Dark One smiles, but he does not trust him. There is too much ambition in the man's mouth and too little loyalty in his heart." Cassius, it seems, had underestimated the one thing Grindelwald prized above all else: unwavering devotion. For all his charm, Cassius was a man driven by legacy, not belief. Grindelwald could see that. The alliance did not come to fruition. Yet it was not immediate rejection. The two held several meetings, each more cautious than the last. Cassius even went so far as to arrange a private demonstration of his influence, leaking confidential ministry files regarding international portkey regulation. It was a dangerous move, one that nearly got him arrested, but Grindelwald did not respond with appreciation. In fact, their final recorded meeting ended in sudden, cryptic silence. According to Rosier's notes, Grindelwald stood up from the candle-lit table, looked Cassius directly in the eye and said, "A man who would betray his country for a crown is not a man I will trust with a throne." That was the end. The correspondence stopped. The chalet in the Alps was burned to the ground 3 days later under mysterious circumstances. To this day, no one knows what exactly transpired in those final moments. Some speculate that Grindelwald uncovered a plot by Cassius to leverage the alliance only to later betray him to British authorities. Others believe Cassius simply became too afraid when he realized the full extent of Grindelwald's vision, which went beyond political control into the realm of magical dominion. But the consequences of that failed alliance rippled through the Malfoy family. Cassius returned to Britain a changed man, quiet, secretive, and increasingly paranoid. He withdrew from public life, retreating into the ancestral home of the Malfoys in Wiltshire. It was there that young Abraxas would spend his formative years, watching his uncle scribble in coded journals and speaking of visions that haunted his sleep. Abraxas himself would later write, in a private letter to Armand Burke, "My uncle touched a darkness too vast for him to control. It did not consume him, but it hollowed him out." That darkness, the allure of Grindelwald's vision, would never fully leave the Malfoy legacy. Though the family would later attach itself to another Dark Lord, the early shadow of Grindelwald lingered like an unhealed wound. Ironically, the failure of that alliance might have spared the Malfoys from annihilation. Many of Grindelwald's known supporters were later hunted down and imprisoned in Nurmengard. Had Cassius joined him, the Malfoy line could have ended in disgrace, or worse. Instead, the family retained its wealth, its position, and the luxury of choosing another side when the time came. Still, some historians argue that Grindelwald's assessment of the Malfoys was not entirely unfair. "Too slippery to trust, too proud to submit," wrote Professor Hugo Travers in The Dark War, Secrets of the European Rebellion. "The Malfoys have always hovered near the fire, but rarely allowed themselves to burn." In 1932, 5 years after his last meeting with Grindelwald, Cassius Malfoy disappeared from public record. Officially, he died of a blood curse, one that ravaged his body and left no remains. But whispers tell of another ending. One tale, told by a half-mad squib in Knockturn Alley, claimed to have seen Cassius alive in 1940, wandering the outskirts of Nurmengard, muttering in tongues and carrying a scorched locket engraved with the Grindelwald insignia. Number 19. The Lost Malfoy Heir. In the shadowed history of the ancient and noble house of Malfoy, whispered secrets often echo louder than the facts recorded in any parchment. Among these hidden threads is the story of Claudius Malfoy, a name that once shimmered with promise on the family tree, but has since been ruthlessly scrubbed from existence. Yet, like all secrets buried in magic, his tale refused to die, carried by rumor, suspicion, and the occasional dangerous discovery. The first mention of Claudius surfaces in a brittle copy of the Daily Prophet, dated 1862, discovered in the attic of a crumbling estate in Wiltshire. There's a photo, blurred by age, of a tall, elegant youth standing stiffly beside his father, Septimus Malfoy, on the steps of the ministry. The article praises Claudius's rapid ascent within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a promising heir, pure of blood and sharp of mind. But after this publication, there is nothing. No marriage notice, no obituary, not even a scandal. That silence is its own kind of story. It was Narcissa Black, future wife of Lucius Malfoy, who accidentally uncovered Claudius's existence in her youth during one of her quiet visits to the Malfoy library. At 16, she found a strange burn mark on the tapestry of the Malfoy family tree, a scorch in the place between Septimus and the next generation. Intrigued, she asked her future husband about it. "It's an imperfection," Lucius replied coldly. "A flaw in the embroidery, best ignored." But embroidery doesn't lie. The truth, whispered by house elf tail and aged squib tongue, is that Claudius fell in love. Not with a fellow pureblood, as the family expected, but with a brilliant, bold-eyed witch named Eleanor Whitlock, born to Muggle parents in Dorset. Eleanor had earned her place at Hogwarts through merit alone and had once duelled a seventh-year Slytherin to a draw while still in her fourth year. Claudius, a prefect 2 years ahead, had watched in secret admiration. "Love is the most dangerous magic," Dumbledore once said, and Claudius Malfoy would prove it true. Their courtship was a dance of shadows, letters smuggled in broomstick handles, meetings in the Forbidden Forest. By their 7th year, Claudius had already proposed, not with the family ring, but with a charmed branch of holly that glowed when held. He wrote in his diary, later discovered in the ruins of a cottage in Brisbane, "I have seen truth in her eyes, not lineage. Blood cannot measure worth. If this love makes me less of a Malfoy, then so be it." Upon graduating, Claudius broke the rules entirely. Instead of submitting to the arrangement ceremony, a tradition wherein the Malfoy heir was matched with a blood-approved bride, he vanished, Eleanor with him. Some say he disapparated from the ceremony itself, leaving behind only a trail of golden ash and a torn boutonniere. The family, furious and humiliated, moved swiftly. Septimus declared Claudius dead to the family, performed the severing ritual, and had his name magically burned from the family tapestry. Every document mentioning him was sealed or destroyed. When questioned, the Malfoys responded with stony silence. Over the years, even portraits that might have included Claudius were repainted to erase his image. But the world is not so easily manipulated. In 1937, a curious Muggle-born researcher at the University of Sydney, Dr. Margot Hales, submitted a thesis titled "Hidden Legacies of British Magic in Colonial Australia." Among her field notes was the curious case of Claudio Whitman, a British wizard who settled in the mountains of Queensland around 1870. Whitman, described as tall, pale, and possessing an unmistakably aristocratic air, was known for his deep knowledge of magical theory, particularly pure blood rituals and wand lore, rare for someone who had no known ties to European wizarding institutions. Dr. Hales interviewed an elderly herbalist named Beatrice Dunwell, who recalled her grandmother speaking of the mysterious Claudio and his equally talented wife, Ellie. "They were kind folk," she said, "but he had a sadness to him. Always watching the sky at night, always afraid someone would come for them. And perhaps he had reason to be. From scattered letters preserved in the Australian Magical Archive, it becomes clear Claudius had not escaped unscathed. "They sent a hunter," he writes in one, "not an aura, someone worse. He wore a ring with a serpent coiled around a bleeding heart, said he would not rest until the shame was avenged." To this day, no one has confirmed who that hunter was. Some believe it was a hired assassin from the Black family. Others suspect a secret society of blood purist enforcers, known only as the Seven. Whatever the case, Claudius and Eleanor moved often. Their children, for there were at least 2, were raised in magical seclusion, taught spells older than Hogwarts itself, and warned never to speak their father's true name. It is said that their eldest daughter, Seraphina, could speak with snakes, a gift that terrified Eleanor. "Not again," she reportedly whispered. Not another Slytherin heir in exile. The last known trace of the lost bloodline comes from a strange entry in the records of Ollivander's wand shop, dated 1955. A wand was sold to a young woman named Clara Whitman, 11 inches, laurel wood, with a core of basilisk sinew, a combination previously used for only 2 known wands in history. When Garrick Ollivander asked about her heritage, the girl had simply said, "I come from an old house, but we've rebuilt our own." Was Clara a descendant of Claudius? The Ollivanders never followed up. Yet the Malfoy name continued to flourish. Without Claudius, without acknowledgement, Lucius Malfoy rose to power. Draco was born. But one wonders if the echo of the lost heir lived on in him, in his quiet doubts, in his eventual turn from Voldemort, in his eyes during the Battle of Hogwarts when he chose not to fight. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Draco,
"You're not a killer, Draco."
Could it be that some part of Claudius's legacy, love over purity, freedom over control, found its way back into the bloodline like a song remembered in sleep? There's an old vault in Gringotts, number 993, long sealed. No name, only an inscription in Latin. Quiamat vincit. He who loves conquers. Vault records say it was opened only once in 1891 and closed forever after. Some say it was Claudius returning for the last of his inheritance, not gold, but a single book bound in white dragon hide on the nature of blood. Number 20. Secret patrons of St. Mungo's Hospital. It was a rainy afternoon in Diagon Alley when a quiet conversation at Flourish and Blots turned into something far more significant than the casual gossip it first seemed. 2 witches in cloaks of modest quality whispered near the section on healing charms. "Can you believe it?" one said, eyes wide, voice nearly trembling with the weight of what she had learned. "They say it was Lucius Malfoy who funded the entire 4th-floor renovation at St. Mungo's, but no one dares print it, not even the prophet." The other witch gasped, "Malfoy, the same man who—" The first only nodded, confirming the impossible. Indeed, it sounds like a contradiction on the surface. The Malfoy name conjures images of cold grandeur, of generations draped in silver and emerald, walking the line between pure blood supremacy and veiled villainy. Yet behind the closed doors of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, whispers had always circulated of anonymous donations, obscure grants for rare disease research, and funding for long-term potion development. Few bothered to trace them, fewer still dared. The truth, like many things in the wizarding world, had been carefully hidden beneath a well-woven glamour. The Malfoys were not philanthropists in the traditional sense. Their aid to St. Mungo's was not born of compassion or moral obligation, but of calculation and long-term strategy. For a family obsessed with legacy and reputation, there was value in quietly bolstering the very institution that saved lives, provided healing, and, most importantly, offered leverage. Lucius Malfoy, patriarch and puppet master of his own destiny, understood better than most that power in the wizarding world did not always reside in the Ministry or Gringotts. Sometimes it flowed through hallways drenched in disinfectant and whispers, where healers bent over broken wizards and potion masters worked through the night to combat magical pandemics. To have influence there was to be irreplaceable. An account kept in the archives of St. Mungo's tells of an incident in 1991, mere weeks before the return of the Dark Lord began to ripple through the wizarding community. A child, 8 years old, was admitted with a cursed wound that resisted all standard magical treatments. The curse bore similarities to old blood magics, the kind that healers rarely saw and often failed to cure. Funding for experimental treatment was required, swiftly. It arrived overnight. The parchment bore no name, only the initials LM and a note. Let this be done, and let it be discreet. The child survived. Years later, that same child, Benedict Avery, a cousin of a known Death Eater, became a healer himself. When questioned during a rare interview, he said, "I owe my life to someone I've never met, or perhaps someone I wish I hadn't. All I know is, if it was Lucius Malfoy, I don't know whether to thank him or fear him." The complexities of such a gesture were not lost on those within the hospital's inner circle. Dolores Harwick, a senior potionologist in the chronic malady ward, had worked on a grant that funded the development of silver root elixir, a treatment for blood-spreading hexes. The grant came through an intermediary trust called the Calum Foundation, based in Wiltshire, just miles from Malfoy Manor. "I remember how strict the terms were," she once said. No interviews, no credits, no names in the annual report. It was like working for a ghost with gold. Narcissa Malfoy, for her part, was less involved with numbers and grants, but her influence was felt through more delicate channels. In 1996, after the attack on Arthur Weasley, it was Narcissa, not Lucius, who sent word to healer Artemis Vance, recommending a specific charm sequence for deep tissue regeneration. Vance, who had trained under Andromeda Tonks, Narcissa's estranged sister, was stunned. "I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade," she recalled. But the owl came. No signature, only a note in her hand. "Try the Florentine spiral. Old lessons die hard." I tried it. It worked. Even Draco Malfoy, despite his notorious school years and entanglement with Death Eater plots, would in later life become tangentially involved. After the war, he reportedly attended a private gathering of donors at the hospital, his name absent from the guest list, but his presence confirmed by 3 separate accounts. He remained for only 30 minutes. When asked what he was doing there, he replied, "Paying a debt, that's all." Some speculate that the debt was personal, others believe it was legacy. The Malfoys did not simply donate gold, they provided rare magical artifacts for research, secured international Mediwich exchange programs, and even arranged for the discreet treatment of individuals the ministry could not be seen helping. It was said that in 1998, during the chaos following Voldemort's final defeat, Lucius arranged for emergency potion supplies to be flown in via Thestral convoy from the French Alps, ensuring that the hospital's basement laboratories never ran dry during the post-war surge. Their involvement, however, was never pure. There was always a ledger, a deal, a quiet understanding that the Malfoys would not be ignored. When Minister Kingsley Shacklebolt tried to investigate unusual funding patterns during a transparency initiative in 2003, the trail vanished behind a maze of legal protections. "It was like chasing mist," he said in a private memo. "And no one wants to pull the curtain too far on the donors keeping the hospital alive." Still, there were those within the wizarding world who resented the hospital's silent acceptance of blood money. In one leaked letter to the Daily Prophet, columnist Cassandra Skeeter, niece of Rita Skeeter, wrote, "Have we sunk so low as to accept coin from the same hands that once shook those of Death Eaters? Are the halls of St. Mungo's built on the backs of the broken?" The letter was never printed. Rumours say the hospital threatened to sue for defamation. Others whisper it was Lucius himself who ensured its disappearance. Albus Dumbledore once said, we must choose between what is easy and what is right. But what of what is necessary? The Board of Magical Medicine has, on record, refused to confirm or deny any involvement by the Malfoy family, even as their facilities expanded, their potion stocks grew, and their disease research reached heights unseen since the 1800s. Was it moral compromise or simply survival? There is no record of Lucius Malfoy ever setting foot inside St. Mungo's main lobby. But one healer, who asked to remain unnamed, swears that in the winter of 1995, She saw him walking alone through the deserted corridors of the spell-damage ward. "He didn't look arrogant," she said. "He looked tired and maybe, just maybe, ashamed." A few days later, an anonymous donation paid for the long-overdue treatment of Janus Thicky, a long-term resident with spell-induced psychosis. In her private memoir, Behind the Wards, senior matron Griselda Whipple wrote of a benefactor she only called the White Serpent. According to her, he once said, "I do not give because I care. I give because I must, because the world forgets too quickly, and I cannot afford to be forgotten." Whipple never confirmed his identity, but everyone knew. It's also worth noting that St. Mungo's new East Wing, constructed in 2010, features architecture suspiciously similar to the atrium hallways of Malfoy Manor, down to the same white marble sourced from a quarry in Greece, owned by a holding company registered under the name Abraxas Holdings. Abraxas, of course, being Lucius's father. Coincidence? Or fingerprint? Some say that the Malfoys' hidden generosity was part of a long redemption arc, an attempt to atone for sins too great to erase. Others insist it was a cold strategy, a way to hold sway over the most vulnerable corner of society, health. Whatever the truth, St. Mungo's has always stood, its floors kept clean, its cauldrons kept full, its researchers paid. And somewhere in the background, a silver snake has always watched. Even within the ministry, rumours persist. "You think the hospital stands because of good intentions?" one aura was overheard saying. "Please, it stands because the right pockets are lined." And when the hospital quietly treated a werewolf child in 2012, against the standing legal code, the funds for his silver resistance therapy came from a vault in Gringotts linked to a private family trust. The goblins refused to comment, but the initials on the withdrawal form matched those of Draco Malfoy. When pressed for answers, the Malfoys have always maintained silence. At one social gala, a reporter once dared ask Narcissa about her family's supposed connection to the hospital. She smiled, touched her pearl necklace, and said only, "Sometimes silence is the kindest form of charity." And so the story lives on in the shadows of marble halls and enchanted corridors, where names are rarely spoken aloud, but the evidence lingers in every new ward, every patient saved, every disease cured. The Malfoys may not wear the robes of saints, but they walk among the healers, ghosts of their own making, patrons of the wounded, redeemers or manipulators in equal measure. Only one thing is certain: if St. Mungo's breathes, it is in part because the Malfoys ensure it does. Whether that breath is pure or poisoned, no one truly knows. But in a world where dark marks once lit the sky, even the faintest acts of healing bear the weight of 1,000 questions, and somewhere in the quiet the white serpent still coils, unseen but always present. Number 21. Cursed Family Jewels. In the heart of Wiltshire, shrouded by cold mists and silence, stands Malfoy Manor, a sprawling estate known for its elegance, power, and chilling history. Among the many secrets hidden behind its ancient stone walls, one tale continues to haunt the minds of those familiar with wizarding folklore, a tale not of spells or battles, but of cursed jewels, betrayal, and madness. The legend of the Malfoy family jewels is not simply a rumor whispered at Hogwarts. It is a story soaked in bloodlines and steeped in sorrow, a legacy forged by pride and punishment. It is said that in the 16th century, when England was no stranger to witch hunts and whispered accusations, a powerful sorceress named Aveline Dumont arrived from France. Her beauty was as potent as her magic, her presence captivating to even the most composed wizard. She was a woman of deep eyes, adorned in obsidian silk and silver rings, etched with runes that shimmered in the moonlight. Rumors claim she was half Veela, a descendant of an ancient line of enchantresses. The then patriarch of the Malfoy family, Septimus Malfoy, met her at a diplomatic gathering in Paris. Entranced, he courted her in secret, even promising her marriage and a share in his fortune. But Septimus was a Malfoy, and Malfoys did not marry for love. When he returned to England, he severed all ties with Aveline, leaving her without explanation. Humiliated and heartbroken, she vanished from the social scene. Weeks later, a parcel arrived at Malfoy Manor, a set of glittering emerald and diamond jewels, accompanied by a note written in a language few could decipher. The jewels were exquisite, a necklace of entwined serpents, earrings shaped like teardrops, and a brooch that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of its own. The family, arrogant and unsuspecting, accepted the gift as a token of a bygone affair. It was Narcissa Malfoy, centuries later, who would retell fragments of this tale to her sister Bellatrix Lestrange during one of their clandestine midnight conversations. "They say she cursed the jewels," Narcissa whispered, her voice low and distant, with the blood of her own heart. That anyone not of Malfoy blood who dared to wear them would suffer misfortune or madness. For years the jewels were kept in a glass case within the deepest vaults beneath Malfoy Manor. Lucius Malfoy himself was known to regard them with suspicion. In private, he called them the Black Teeth of Wiltshire, and warned even Draco never to touch them. "They belong to the bloodline, Draco," he once said. But blood, no matter how noble, must treat power with caution. The curse, however, remained only a whispered legend until the year 1834, when a distant cousin, Seraphina Rawle, born to a minor branch of the family, visited the manor during a winter gathering. Seraphina was spirited, curious, and a touch rebellious, unafraid of the cold glances from her more prestigious relatives. When left alone one afternoon, she wandered the lower halls and discovered the vault. It is unclear whether she opened it with magic or merely found it ajar. What is known through written correspondence found decades later is that she wore the necklace to a formal dinner the same evening. Witnesses described her as radiant that night, her neck shimmering with emerald fire. But her eyes, they said, seemed distracted, unfocused, as if hearing voices that others could not. By morning, Seraphina had vanished from her bed. She was found days later wandering the edges of the Wiltshire moors, her feet bare, lips muttering fragments of ancient French. She no longer recognized her own name. A healer from St. Mungo's declared her mind fractured by unnatural forces. The family tried to bury the incident, claiming illness. The jewels were returned to the vault, sealed with wards more powerful than before. But from that day forward, the legend could no longer be ignored. The curse was real. The price had been paid. Interestingly, J.K. Rowling never confirmed this tale in her books, but she hinted at the dark past of Malfoy heirlooms. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says to Harry, "You place too much importance on the so-called purity of blood. You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." Though not a direct reference, many interpret this as a veiled criticism of the very pride that led the Malfoys to guard cursed treasures instead of discarding them. Lucius Malfoy, too, seemed affected by the history. In the Second Wizarding War, his decisions grew more erratic, more desperate, perhaps haunted not just by Voldemort, but by the weight of his family's relics. When Narcissa suggested selling some of the older pieces to avoid suspicion from the ministry, Lucius reportedly refused with cold finality. "We may lose gold," he said, "but we do not lose legacy." Draco, however, had a different relationship with the story. As a child, he often asked his mother about the green fire jewels, but she would shake her head. "They are not for play," she said once, clutching his hand. "They are a warning." And yet the temptation remained. In a letter preserved by the Black Family Archives dated 1991, Bellatrix wrote to Narcissa, "You must destroy them, Sissy. I know what I saw. The necklace speaks in dreams, and it lies. Was the curse ever truly lifted?" Some say yes, others believe the enchantment remains dormant, waiting. After the war, as the ministry raided many pure-blood estates, it is believed the jewels were hidden, perhaps in a secret chamber known only to Draco himself. There's a curious account from 2011 told by an auror named Cassian Burke, who claimed during a routine inspection to have glimpsed a display case hidden behind a tapestry in the east wing of the manor. "It was covered in black velvet," he said, "but I felt something cold, as if my bones turned to ice." When asked if he investigated further, Burke said he was ordered to leave the room. No further comment was given. Magic has always been an extension of intent, and curses born of betrayal often grow like weeds in the dark corners of the soul. Aveline Dumont's vengeance, if real, was woven not just into metal, but into memory. The curse was personal, not just a punishment, but a poetic echo of loss. Her final words, inscribed in Old Occitan on the note sent with the jewels, were later translated by a historian from Beauxbatons. "If I cannot wear your name, then let none wear my gift without sorrow." It is not unreasonable to suspect that even Voldemort, during his brief uses of the manor, kept a respectful distance from the vault. He valued relics of power, yes, but he was not foolish. There are stories that he once asked Lucius if the serpent brooch could be used as a Horcrux, and Lucius flatly declined. "Some things," Lucius whispered, "are already cursed far beyond your needs." Perhaps the strangest tale of all comes from a Hogwarts student named Astoria Greengrass, who would later become Draco's wife. Astoria, whose bloodline was ancient and unyielding, once told a fellow Slytherin during her 6th year that she'd dreamed of the necklace. "It was wrapped around my throat," she said, "and I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't take it off either. It whispered to me. It knew my name." Whether coincidence or omen, Astoria's health declined rapidly after the birth of Scorpius. She remained frail until her untimely death. Draco never commented on whether the necklace was involved, but some believe that Astoria, in an effort to understand the curse that had haunted the Malfoys for generations, may have worn it, if only once. The manor today stands quiet under preservation spells and the occasional watch of ministry officials. Draco visits rarely. Scorpius, curious like his father once was, reportedly asked about the jewels on his 11th birthday. Draco said only this: "There are things in this world that do not forget, Scorpius, and some things that should never be worn." The legend continues to ripple through wizarding society like a chill on a warm day. Healers at St. Mungo's have noted a series of cases over the years: sudden onset madness, voices heard from inanimate objects, visions of green serpents. None have been officially tied to the Malfoy jewels, but in each case the victims bore bruises in the shape of chains around the neck. Could the curse be sentient? Could it reach beyond the family vault? No one knows. But one thing remains certain. Power, when stolen, exacts a price. And vengeance, when enchanted, becomes eternal. In the end, the tale of the Malfoy family jewels is not merely about magic, but about pride, betrayal, and the long shadows cast by grief. They glitter, yes, but their shine is not of beauty, but of warning. A green flame in the dark, forever whispering, "Remember me." Number 22. Centuries-long conflict with goblins. For centuries, a quiet but bitter feud simmered beneath the polished veneer of wizarding aristocracy. The Malfoy family, proud and immaculately composed, had long regarded themselves as above reproach. Yet there was one group they could never quite bend to their will, the goblins of Gringotts. These sharp-minded, fiercely independent creatures had their own laws, their own codes of ownership, and a collective memory longer than the tapestry of any wizarding lineage. The Malfoys, however, had never been ones to yield, even when it meant tangling with the most unyielding creatures in the magical world. The first real breach between the Malfoys and the goblins of Gringotts began, by some accounts, in the late 1600s with Septimus Malfoy, a man known for his silver tongue and ruthless ambition. Septimus had attempted to acquire a cursed relic, a goblin-forged ceremonial blade called Tharnskull, which, according to ancient tradition, could not be passed to a wizard by sale, but only by goblin gift or through goblin inheritance. Septimus, of course, cared little for goblin laws. He paid a fortune to a dubious intermediary, acquired the blade in secret, and mounted it proudly above his fireplace. Within weeks, the fires of his estate flared green and consumed half the east wing. The goblins sent no letter of complaint, just a silent message that only the most foolish could ignore. The Malfoys, though chastened by the event, grew no humbler. By the time Armand Malfoy took control of the family affairs in the 1700s, the feud had already become personal. Armand famously accused Gringotts of embezzlement after a vault containing ancestral jewels was found nearly empty. Goblin investigators denied wrongdoing and claimed the items had been removed by Armand's own grandfather, but Armand refused to believe it. For years, the family conducted its own audit of Gringotts' transactions. The findings were inconclusive, but that hardly mattered. Distrust had taken root, and it would never again be weeded out. One of the most infamous episodes came in 1812 during the stewardship of Calum Malfoy, a cruel but intelligent patriarch who allegedly attempted to bribe a high-ranking goblin, Ragnok the Elder, in exchange for exclusive access to vaults predating the bank's official registry. When Ragnok rebuffed him, Calum launched a public smear campaign in the Daily Prophet, accusing the goblins of hoarding magical artifacts and denying wizards their rightful inheritances. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. A rare joint statement was issued by the Goblin Council. Property forged by goblin hands remains goblin property unless gifted by the forge master himself. Wizard contracts are not valid if made in ignorance of goblin law. The ministry tried to intervene, but both sides refused to negotiate. It was around this time that the Malfoys began keeping most of their wealth within the walls of Malfoy Manor. Portraits were enchanted with silent alarms, cursed cabinets held ledgers and documents, a dragon-hide vault was constructed in the cellar. "Better the breath of our own wards than the chill of goblin vaults," Calum was said to have muttered after his final visit to Gringotts. The goblins, for their part, made no effort to persuade the Malfoys back. A kind of Cold War had begun, one that would flare up now and then, but mostly stayed buried under smiles and careful business language. The matter of inheritance remained the sorest of points. Goblin logic dictated that any item forged by goblins, even if bought legally, reverted to goblin ownership upon the death of the human possessor, unless specified otherwise in a binding goblin-validated will. The Malfoys, obsessed with legacy, could never stomach this idea. "They view themselves as the true architects of ownership," Lucius Malfoy once scoffed to a colleague, "as if money does not confer dominion." His distaste for goblin law would become a hallmark of his dealings with Gringotts. Lucius, in particular, made several attempts during the 1980s and early 1990s to reclaim artifacts he believed were wrongfully confiscated by the bank. One item was a goblin-forged scepter that once belonged to his ancestor, Balthazar Malfoy. It had been deposited in Gringotts for safekeeping, but when Lucius tried to retrieve it, he was informed that the artifact had been transferred to the Goblin archives after Balthazar's death due to a clause in the original deposit contract. Lucius threatened legal action. The Goblins responded by barring him from the high vaults for a full year. "It is ours," the Goblins wrote curtly. "As per the accord your ancestor signed in 1789, witnessed and sealed in Goblin magic. Your protest is noted, your entry is denied." That confrontation became widely known in elite wizarding circles and further damaged Lucius's already tenuous relationships with magical creatures. Narcissa Malfoy was said to have urged her husband to abandon the dispute, fearing it would taint their son's name before he even set foot at Hogwarts. Lucius refused. "They will not write our history for us," he hissed. "We are Malfoys. We are history." Even Draco, from a young age, absorbed the family's distaste for goblins. Though he never said it aloud at school, those close to him knew he avoided discussing Gringotts and scoffed at any suggestion that goblins could be trusted. When he once asked his father why they didn't just force the goblins to comply, Lucius responded, "Because they do not bend, they remember every wrong, and they do not forgive. You must understand, Draco, our gold is safer under our roof than in their claws." After Voldemort's return, the relationship between the Malfoys and the goblins became even more complicated. With Gringotts tightening its security and growing increasingly independent of ministry influence, Lucius saw the bank as both a threat and an obstacle. He allegedly proposed to the Dark Lord a secret raid on select vaults, including ones he believed held confiscated Malfoy heirlooms. Voldemort, however, dismissed the idea. "Goblins are not to be trifled with," he reportedly told Lucius. "They keep their treasures in stone and blood. We have other paths." The failed attempt to infiltrate Gringotts in the final year of the war, when Harry, Hermione and Ron broke into Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, only deepened the rift. Though the Malfoys were not directly involved in that breach, the event reopened wounds. Goblins cited the incident as proof of wizard recklessness. Lucius, weakened and disgraced, could only watch as the bank tightened its policies even further. His attempts to reclaim family artifacts after the war were met with complete silence from the goblin clerks. It was said that by the time of Lucius's twilight years, he no longer trusted any bank at all. Rumours swirled that he had begun hiding artifacts beneath ancient Malfoy crypts and even burying cursed treasures beneath the roots of forbidden trees on their estate. One house elf claimed to have seen Lucius whispering spells over a golden pendant and lowering it into a stone coffin. "Mine," he was said to have whispered, "not theirs, never theirs." Yet not all Malfoys were content to carry the torch of hatred. Scorpius Malfoy, son of Draco, once questioned his father about the vault dispute while visiting the manor's restricted library. Draco, older and more reflective, told him simply, "Some wars are won by walking away from them, but others walk after you." He never gave Scorpius a straight answer. But in the way he paused, the way his eyes lingered on the old portraits, it was clear that the bitterness still haunted him. Some goblins, too, remembered the feud with an almost poetic passion. Gornook, a goblin who once travelled with Griphook, referred to the Malfoys as the cursed ones who never understood value. He meant not gold, but principle. "They speak of ownership," Gornook said in hushed tones, "but they do not see the forge. They buy, but they never honour. That is why they do not deserve." One particularly evocative legend passed around by younger goblins concerns a Malfoy ring, green emerald, set in goblin-forged platinum that allegedly curses any goblin who dares touch it. It was said to have been stolen in the early 1800s, never returned, and hidden inside a wardrobe in the east wing of Malfoy Manor. The goblins believe that it will one day find its way home, not by theft or diplomacy, but by some dark magic older than either race. Interestingly, not all goblins see the Malfoys as enemies. A retired goblin banker named Snagir once admitted, "At least they were consistent. Most wizards lie, Malfoys never lied. They demanded. That, in its own way, is honest." But he followed the comment with a telling smile. Honest and still wrong. It is difficult to say where this ancient conflict will end. Wizarding society has shifted. The new generation of Malfoys, humbled by war and disgrace, seem less eager to provoke the goblins. Yet the past lingers in every vault ledger, in every disputed artifact, in every whispered tale of cursed objects and vanished documents. The battle continues. And so the vaults remain closed, the manor remains guarded, and somewhere in the shadows of history, the echo of an old argument still rings. Who owns magic? The wizards who wield it, or the goblins who shape it? Number 23. Underground tunnels beneath the manor. Few wizards know what truly lies beneath the marble floors and silver-gilded halls of Malfoy Manor. To the outside world, the estate is a symbol of pure blood supremacy, ornate, elegant, untouched by time. But deep below, in the silence of earth and shadow, coils a far older story. A story of escape routes, forbidden magic, and secrets that whisper louder than any family legacy ever could. It is said that the first of these tunnels were carved during the time of Armand Malfoy, the founding patriarch who arrived in Britain with William the Conqueror in 1066. Armand, cunning and ambitious, was gifted lands in Wiltshire in exchange for magical services rendered to the crown. But power breeds paranoia, and Armand, wary of betrayal and uprising, commissioned the digging of a subterranean path beneath his new estate. This tunnel led deep into the woods, where he could disappear if need be. His descendants would not only preserve this passage, but expand it, generation by generation. Over time, the tunnels multiplied like veins beneath the skin of the manor. Some led into the dense Wiltshire forest, others burrowed into old Roman ruins long buried and forgotten. One even stretched as far as the edge of Muggle Salisbury, cleverly concealed behind a long-abandoned chapel. No ministry official ever discovered them. And that perhaps was the point. Lucius Malfoy, refined and ever-calculating, knew of every inch of this underground maze. It was rumoured that during the First Wizarding War, when Aurors raided suspected Death Eater homes, Lucius vanished through one such tunnel mere moments before the doors were blasted open. His sudden and unexplained disappearances became legend among the ministry. "Slippery as a wet eel," Alastair Moody once growled. "Never where you want him to be, and always one step ahead." The tunnels were not merely passages of flight, but chambers of strategy. Deep below the manor's western wing lies a vaulted hall, known in family lore as the Strategium. Here, maps were once unfurled under candlelight. Secret meetings with other dark-aligned families took place in hushed voices. It was in this very room, some claim, that Lucius first pledged his loyalty to Lord Voldemort. The walls remember, even if the family would deny it now. Draco Malfoy, as a child, was not permitted to explore the tunnels alone. Narcissa feared what he might find or awaken. Some passages, after all, had not been entered in centuries. The Malfoys employed house elves to inspect them once a year, a grim ritual where creatures like Dobby, before his liberation, would return shaking and pale. Once, in 1987, an elf named Tinky never returned at all. "Collapsed wall," Lucius explained coldly. "Nothing more." But Draco would sometimes hear murmurs from the floorboards at night. One particularly chilling tale surrounds the North Tunnel, the oldest and most treacherous of them all. According to the family grimoire, this passage had been enchanted with disillusionment charms so powerful that even the person walking it would forget their own identity the farther they went. Lucius warned Draco never to enter. "Some doors," he said one cold morning, "do not lead back to where you began." During Voldemort's second rise, Malfoy Manor served as his headquarters. The tunnels became more than escape routes, they were arteries of power. Death Eaters slipped in and out unseen. Travers, Dolohov, the Carrows, they all used these hidden paths to appear when the Dark Lord summoned them. One night, Severus Snape entered through a tunnel during a storm. Mud-covered and silent, he emerged in the drawing room and delivered grim news. Dumbledore's movements had changed. "The old goat's grown unpredictable," he muttered, dripping on Narcissa's carpet. Lucius said nothing. He already knew, but the tunnel's most dramatic use came on a February night. In 1997, Harry Potter had been captured and brought to the manor. While Bellatrix interrogated Hermione upstairs, a desperate plan took root below. Narcissa, fearing Voldemort's wrath if Potter were to die under her roof, secretly instructed the house-elf creature to ready the southern tunnel. "If things go wrong," she whispered, "there must be a way out." The tunnel was never used that night. Dobby's heroic intervention rendered it unnecessary, but its presence underlines the manor's dual nature. It was a fortress of dark power, yes, but also a house of options. A place built not just to dominate, but to survive. After the war, the Ministry seized many Death Eater properties, yet Malfoy Manor remained untouched, at least in structure. Officials claimed they searched it thoroughly, but none ever reported discovering the tunnels. Some suggest that Lucius used old enchantments, cloaking the entries with powerful confundus and obscuro charms. Others whisper that gold changed hands. Kingsley Shacklebolt, then minister, was asked in an interview whether Malfoy Manor's tunnels were real. He gave a tired smile and said, "The past has a way of burying itself." In 2005, a curious event rekindled public speculation. A Muggle archaeologist named David Llewellyn vanished while studying medieval land grants in Wiltshire. His final journal entry mentioned an unusual depression in the earth near the Malfoy estate. The Malfoys denied involvement, but local oral files, since leaked, indicate that traces of Muggle presence were found in the woods near one of the rumoured tunnel exits. "Charming coincidence," noted the report, with a hint of irony. More than a few historians have tried to chart the tunnels. Bathilda Bagshot, before her death, referenced a buried corridor in Wiltshire, likely predating most wizarding architecture in the region. Others point to sketches in the Black family archives that show what appear to be subterranean routes leading directly into the manor from various points around the countryside. One line was labelled only with a word: escape. Even today, whispers persist. A squib named Martha Higgs once worked as a maid at the manor during the early 90s. Dismissed without severance, she later spoke to the Quibbler. "There's a door in the cellar," she said, "hidden behind barrels of elf wine, not locked, just waiting." She claimed she once followed it for hours, only to find herself outside, beside a standing stone she'd never seen before. Lucius Malfoy never commented on her story, nor did Draco, who has since distanced himself from the manor. Yet during a Wizengamot inquiry in 2001, when asked whether he had ever used the tunnels to escape Ministry surveillance, Lucius smiled slightly and said, "Gentlemen, if I had ever needed to flee, would I be sitting here today?" Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the tunnels is not what they were used for, but what they might still contain. The Malfoy family, known for their collection of cursed artifacts and obscure magical items, may have hidden more than just themselves below the surface. Some believe that Armand Malfoy buried his original wand in the walls of the North Tunnel, wrapped in basilisk hide and enchanted to protect the family bloodline. Others speak of a chamber that contains mirrors enchanted to show your greatest enemy, not just their face, but their thoughts. The Ministry has shown no official interest in investigating these tales, Publicly, they dismissed them as folklore, but in 2019 an unspeakable named Elric Yaxley was seen entering the Wiltshire woods with 3 junior agents. None returned by nightfall. Their bodies were found weeks later, far from the manor, their minds apparently shattered. One had written a single word on a leaf in his pocket: reflected. Whether that relates to the rumoured mirror chamber, no one can say. But it underscores a simple truth. The deeper you go into Malfoy Manor's past, the more you are forced to reckon with the weight of its secrets. And like the earth itself, it does not give them up easily. Today the manor stands silent. No official gatherings, no visible comings or goings, but lights are sometimes seen flickering beneath the hedgerows late at night. A faint hum, like a chant or a heartbeat, has been reported by hikers near the eastern woods. Perhaps the tunnels still breathe, perhaps they wait, and perhaps, just perhaps, they are still being used.